6 o'clock. Every coastline on Earth wakes up wrong. What if Antarctica melted overnight before sunrise even ended? By breakfast, every map still works. Every city does not. The white continent seems distant, almost detached from daily life. But distance is misleading when the planet stores consequences there. Antarctica holds Earth's biggest ice sheet. It also locks away most freshwater ice. Erase that in hours, and oceans do not rise politely. They surge inland, redraw borders, and erase familiar ground. The first question sounds simple. How high would water climb? The real question is harsher. What fails before waters settle? This is not one flood, 1 week, or one headline. It becomes a chain reaction through maps, weather, food, and power. And the strangest effect may start where seas seem safest. Sea level begins rising almost everywhere, almost immediately. Not as a calm bathtub line, but uneven, accelerating pressure. Harbors overflow first, then storm drains, then subway mouths. Airport runways near coasts turn reflective before flights even land. Ports fail while ships grind against broken moorings and piers. Delta cities suffer first because flat land offers little resistance. Shanghai, Kolkata, Bangkok, Alexandria, Miami, Amsterdam, Lagos. Familiar skylines become shrinking islands above widening brown water. Bridges turn into choke points, then dead ends. Tunnels become traps the moment seawater finds the lowest entrance. Sewage systems reverse direction and flood streets from below. Emergency plans break because roads vanish in the wrong order. And this happens before the planet answers a deeper question. What happens when Antarctica itself suddenly loses all that weight? Antarctica is not just frozen water resting on rock. Its ice presses down on the crust with immense force. Remove that load, and the buried land starts rebounding upward. Not in one cinematic jump, but over centuries and millennia. That sounds slower than flooding, so people dismiss it first. They should not. Pressure changes can alter stress along faults and volcanic systems. West Antarctica already hides volcanoes beneath kilometers of ice. Take away that weight, and subterranean plumbing can react. Some regions could see more earthquakes as the crust adjusts. Others might release more heat through changing volcanic behavior. The melt is global, but the geology turns regional and messy. A drowned coast is obvious. A destabilized continent is not. One disaster is visible from space. The other unfolds underground, where warning signs stay confusing. And then, the sky joins the emergency. Antarctica is brutally bright, and brightness matters. Ice reflects sunlight back to space instead of absorbing it. Remove that reflective shield, and dark ocean drinks more heat. The overnight melt does not stay an overnight event. The planet starts collecting extra energy almost at once. That added heat weakens nearby sea ice from below. It also changes temperature contrasts that shape winds and storms. The Southern Ocean helps regulate global heat movement. Now, the engine room becomes warmer, fresher, and less stable. The flood was the first punch. Climate instability becomes the second, and it reaches inland. Places never touched by seawater still feel the shift. Rain bands can move, storm tracks can drift. Cold regions may warm faster, but not evenly. Some regions may even cool briefly from circulation changes. A hotter world can still create colder local surprises. That contradiction confuses people exactly when clarity matters most. Within hours, some coasts face a strange delay. The sea does not peak everywhere at the same moment. Gravity has a hidden role almost nobody sees coming. Antarctica's ice has mass, and mass pulls seawater toward it. Today, that pull slightly heaps ocean water closer southward. Remove the ice, and nearby seas can rise less at first. Farther away, especially northward, rise can become even worse. The worst flooding may hit places far from Antarctica itself. So the flood map is not fair, neat, or intuitive. A nation could hear one global number and still evacuate wrongly. This scrambles the math of every response plan. It also creates a cruel illusion. Some southern coasts may think they were spared. They were not spared. They were merely early in a slower version of disaster. While that confusion spreads, rivers begin failing from the wrong end. Higher oceans block river mouths and slow freshwater escape. Water backs up inland through estuaries, deltas, and flat valleys. Salt pushes upstream into farms, marshes, and drinking supplies. Rice fields fail differently than business districts, but both fail. Reservoir intakes near coasts start tasting the ocean. Sewage outfalls stop draining and begin contaminating neighborhoods instead. Chemical storage sites near shorelines become moving pollution sources. Oil terminals, fertilizer depots, and refineries turn into toxic hazards. Freshwater paradox arrives fast. More water everywhere, less to drink. Desalination plants help only where power and intake pipes survive, and power is already becoming unstable. Coastal substations flood early because they sit on cheap, low land. Transmission corridors snap where towers sink or access roads disappear. A city can remain mostly dry and still go dark. A hospital can stand intact and still lose oxygen deliveries. The world stops arguing about beach lines. It starts counting pumps, reservoirs, and surviving inland routes. Then the human math becomes impossible to ignore. The first week becomes a relocation crisis. Not everyone is underwater, but critical infrastructure often is. Roads sever at tunnels, rail hubs, bridges, and fuel depots. An inland city may stay dry, yet lose food deliveries. A functioning power plant may lose transmission or cooling systems. Digital networks fail where cables, exchanges, and backup generators flood. Insurance models collapse first on paper, then in banks. Property values can crash before buildings physically collapse. Governments face a brutal choice: defend key zones or abandon them. Temporary barriers help in a few places, then fail mathematically. This is not one storm passing through. It is a new baseline arriving without negotiation. Markets panic because they price future land, not just present damage. Families hesitate because evacuation feels temporary at first. Then they see tides returning higher each day. And that is when the ocean crisis becomes a civilization crisis. Now the seas themselves start changing character. Antarctica stores immense freshwater, and sudden melt dilutes seawater. Normally, colder and saltier water sinks in key regions. That sinking helps drive major ocean circulation systems. Freshen the surface too much, and sinking can weaken. One of Earth's great conveyor belts starts wobbling. Heat moves differently, nutrients move differently. Marine ecosystems built on stable patterns begin unraveling. Some fisheries crash from habitat shifts before coastlines even settle. Krill lose cold habitat, and that echoes upward fast. Whales, seals, penguins, and fish all feel the shortage. Coral reefs, already stressed by heat, face altered currents too. So places not drowned can still lose protein, jobs, and trade. The coastline crisis quietly becomes an ocean food crisis. And then comes the twist people rarely expect. Total melting does not mean even warming everywhere all at once. A disrupted ocean can make some regions temporarily cooler. That only makes planning harder. Agriculture hates unpredictability more than it hates averages. Storm tracks can shift, rain belts can move, monsoons may weaken in one region and intensify elsewhere. Snowpack may vanish earlier, starving rivers months later. Some fields drown first, then dry out later. A few degrees matter, but timing matters even more. If rain arrives weeks late, harvest calendars break. If heat arrives during pollination, yields can collapse suddenly. Saltwater intrusion ruins soils long after floodwater retreats. Coastal aquifers may stay contaminated for years. Livestock feed prices spike when grain belts underperform together. Global trade can soften local crop failure, but global trade weakens when ports themselves are failing. So hunger does not always start where fields flood. It can begin far inland after logistics fail quietly. The flood footage dominates screens. The food shock builds slower, and slower disasters often bite deeper. By the second week, maps of nations become negotiations. Some island states lose usable land almost completely. Atolls are especially vulnerable because they start barely above sea level. Airstrips disappear long before every home does. A country can keep a flag and still lose fresh water. So where does a state go if its land stops functioning? Coastal heritage vanishes too. Ports, cemeteries, temples, old districts. Human history clustered near water for obvious reasons. Now those same reasons become liabilities. Ancient harbors, trading quarters, and waterfront walls go first. Museums can move artifacts, but not original landscapes. Archaeological sites turn into salvage operations against advancing salt water. The planet's memory is stored in river mud and stone. One melt event could erase chapters before we record them. And the losses are not only cultural or economic, they also become legal. Maritime boundaries depend on coastlines. Change the shore and you complicate fishing rights, mineral claims, and control. The water is rising, but the arguments rise with it. There is another hidden machine tied to Antarctica: ice shelves. These floating shelves already matter more than they look. In this scenario, those braces disappear instantly too. That matters because glaciers do not simply melt in place, they also flow. Remove the restraint, and surviving ice upstream can accelerate seaward. So the famous sea level jump is not the only jump. After the first giant surge comes a drawn-out aftershock phase. Warmer ocean water keeps attacking newly exposed ice margins. Fresh cracks open where stable fronts used to exist. The world spends decades discovering the event was not one event. It was an opening blast followed by rolling consequences. This is why the word overnight is misleading. The trigger happens overnight. The settling takes centuries. And during that settling, the safest places on today's map change. That brings the crisis inland. Cities away from coasts inherit displaced populations and broken supply chains. Housing shortages become continental, not local. Dry land near rail hubs, rivers, and elevation turns strategic. Property booms in some upland regions while former capitals decline. New ports must be built farther inland where geography allows. Some old industrial belts drown. New ones rise in safer zones. Borders harden around water, farmland, and transport corridors. Migration pressure strains alliances before soldiers ever move. This is how a geophysical shock becomes political weather. Not because human nature changed overnight, because the ground beneath every institution changed first. Land ownership, tax bases, voting districts, and labor markets all shift. Universities, hospitals, and factories do not relocate as fast as families. Some inland towns become megacities almost by accident. Others fracture under sudden demand for housing and water. A coastline catastrophe rewrites the interior too. And wildlife is being rewritten at the same time. Penguins lose breeding platforms and feeding patterns together. Seals lose ice haulouts while open water expands elsewhere. Some species briefly gain range, then lose food webs beneath them. On land, saltwater intrusion kills coastal forests from the roots. Marshes can migrate inland only if development leaves room. Where seawalls block retreat, wetlands simply drown in place. Mangroves, estuaries, and fish nurseries shrink or relocate. That weakens natural storm buffers right when they are needed most. Mosquito ranges may shift with warmer, wetter coastal edges. Rodent habitats can shift too after flooding and crop loss. So the new coastline is not just farther inland, it is biologically different, chemically different, and seasonally different. This changes something many people never connect to polar ice. Disease geography. Pathogens travel with water failures, heat stress, displacement, and insects. Public health stops being a separate problem. It merges with infrastructure collapse. Flooded clinics mean interrupted vaccines, dialysis, and emergency care. Warmer zones can expand habitat for some insects and pathogens. Salted groundwater damages crops, then nutrition weakens communities. Mold spreads through half-flooded buildings left standing too long. Heat waves intensify where darker, new water absorbs more sunlight. Mental strain follows debt, relocation, uncertainty, and repeated evacuation. Disaster usually peaks, then recovery begins. Here, the baseline itself has shifted upward permanently, so recovery becomes adaptation, and adaptation costs generations. The world is no longer asking how to rebuild yesterday. It is asking where tomorrow can still function. This is why the most frightening damage is not always dramatic. It is administrative. Insurance, zoning, public health, education, and supply planning all depend on stability. Take stability away, and modern systems lose their rhythm. People can survive chaos for days. Civilizations struggle when chaos becomes routine. And by the first year, Earth itself looks unfamiliar from orbit. Satellites would show a stranger planet almost immediately. Antarctica, once blinding white, now looks fractured, dark, and wet. Freshwater lenses spread across southern seas in massive swirls. New coastlines snake around drowned valleys and surviving ridges. Some mountain chains become long islands above shallow interior seas. Huge plains on several continents vanish beneath new water. Shipping routes change, but not for simple reasons. Some routes shorten across opened polar waters. Many more become useless because ports, canals, and fuel networks are gone. Trade survives only after rebuilding from a new map. And even then, one mystery stays open. Would sea level stop at the famous number? Not neatly, and not in any quick human sense. Water redistributes